The wind came down from the high plains like a blade, sharp enough to cut through bone. Eli Mercer felt it bite through his coat as he leaned on the fence, watching the sky bruise purple with the promise of snow. Winter always arrived early out. Here, uninvited and unforgiving, and Eli had learned long ago that the land didn't care how tired a man was or how alone, it would test you anyway. That was when he saw the figure stumbling along the dirt road, bent forward against the wind, wrapped in little more than a thin shirt and worn trousers. Something in the way the man moved, slow, stubborn, refusing to fall, made Eli straighten. He had seen that walk before, was the walk of someone who had learned to endure. Eli was a rancher, born and raised, the third generation to work this spread of dry grass and stubborn earth. His father had died with his boots on, and his mother had followed not long after, leaving Eli with acres of land in a silence that pressed in at night. He didn't have much company beyond his cattle and the old dog that slept by the stove, but he had rules he lived by. One of them was simple. You didn't turn away someone in trouble. So when the stranger reached the gate and paused, swaying like a tree about to fall, Eli didn't hesitate. He pushed open the fence and walked out to meet him. Up close, the man's face was weathered and proud, his dark eyes clouded with exhaustion. He was native, Eli guessed, maybe from one of the nearby reservations that had been carved into scraps decades ago. The man tried to speak, but his teeth chattered so hard, the words broke apart. Eli noticed the blue tinge on his lips, the way his hands shook. Without a word, Eli shrugged off his heavy ranch jacket, the one lined with fleece. His mother had sewn years ago and draped it over the man's shoulders. The stranger stiffened, clearly unused to kindness from a white rancher on a lonely road, but the warmth won the argument. He pulled the jacket tight, breathing out a shaky sigh. "Storm's coming," Eli said, his voice low and steady. "You can warm up inside if you want?" The man shook his head slowly. "I must go on," he managed, his voice hoarse. "My people, they wait." Eli nodded. He didn't push. He reached into his pocket and pressed a few bills into the man's hand, along with directions to the nearest town. The stranger looked at the money, then back at Eli, something like disbelief crossing his face. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head slightly. "You have given more than you know," he said. Then, pulling the jacket tighter, he turned and walked back into the wind. That night, the storm hit hard. Snow piled against the windows, and the wind howled like something alive. Eli sat by the fire, staring at the empty hook where his jacket usually hung. He wondered if the man had made it, if the warmth had been enough. Out here, small choices could mean the difference between life and death. He said a quiet prayer before bed, something his mother used to do, and hoped the stranger was safe. Morning came with a strange stillness. The storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white. Eli woke early, as he always did, fed the cattle, and fixed a broken hinge on the barn door. As the sun climbed higher, something caught his eye beyond the fence line. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, dark shapes standing against the snow. Then he saw them move. Men on horseback lined the edge of his property, stretching farther than he could see. They were dressed in traditional clothing and winter gear, their faces solemn, their posture disciplined. Banners stirred gently in the cold air, and the quiet was so complete it rang in Eli's ears. His heart thudded hard in his chest. 100 warriors, maybe more, stood at his fence, not advancing, not speaking, just waiting. Eli's mind raced. He knew the history of this land, the blood spilled, the broken treaties. He wondered if some old wrong had finally come calling. He took a breath, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the fence. The warriors parted slightly, and one man rode forward. Eli recognized him immediately. It was the stranger from the road, his face clean now, his posture strong. He wore Eli's jacket still, though it looked different on him now. Like a badge of honor, the man dismounted and approached the fence. "My name is Thomas Red Elk," he said clearly. "Yesterday, you saved my life." Eli swallowed. "Just gave you a jacket," he replied. Thomas shook his head. "No, you gave me respect. You saw a man freezing and treated him like a brother. Many would not have." He gestured behind him, and a murmur passed through the line of warriors. "These are my people. When I returned, alive because of your kindness, I told them what you did. In our way, such a gift creates a bond. We come not in anger, but in gratitude." Relief washed over Eli so hard his knees nearly gave out. Thomas continued, explaining that the storm had trapped several families on the reservation. Roads were blocked, supplies running low. When Thomas had been sent for help, he'd nearly frozen before reaching Eli's land. The jacket had kept him alive long enough to reach safety.
Ow.
His people had come to offer help in return. That winter turned out to be the hardest anyone could remember. Fences collapsed under snow, cattle fell sick, and the old well pump froze solid. But Eli was no longer alone. Day after day, the warriors returned not as warriors, but as neighbors. They repaired fences, shared food, and taught Eli how to read the land in winter, how to find shelter where he saw none. In return, Eli opened his barn, his table, and his heart. Stories were exchanged by firelight, laughter mixing with the crackle of burning wood. Old wounds didn't vanish, but they were acknowledged, spoken of honestly, without blame. By spring, something new had taken root on the ranch. Eli helped advocate for better access roads to the reservation. The tribe helped him restore a dry creek bed using methods their ancestors had perfected. The land responded, greener and stronger than before. When the jacket finally wore thin, Thomas returned it, neatly mended. Eli smiled and hung it back on the hook, knowing it carried a story far greater than it seems. Years later, when people asked Eli about the day 200 warriors lined up at his fence, he would just shrug and say it started with a cold morning. And a simple choice, kindness, he'd learned, was never small. Out here on land shaped by hardship and hope, one good act could echo across generations, turning strangers into allies and fences into meeting places.